Hi, welcome back. So one of the subscribers sent me a note and said she was a high school senior and wanted to explore the career possibilities of becoming an ASL interpreter. So first, thanks for the request. This video is going to dig pretty deep. We'll talk about the process to becoming an ASL interpreter, nationally certified. And we'll talk about different stages depending upon where you're at. High school, college and university, and post-university for those individuals who are thinking about perhaps a career change. So let's talk about why. I think almost any time you get advice when it comes to careers or passions, why is pretty critical. So the question you've got to ask yourself is, why would I want to become an ASL interpreter? You may have a family member, a friend, somebody, a coworker that you may have known that was deaf and you learned a little bit of sign language. As far as a family member goes, perhaps it's a parent. In my case, for example, I'm a CODA. If you're new to the channel, C-O-D-A, a CODA, is a child of deaf adults. Okay, so that's what got me into sign language. It's my native language. You may have taken a few classes in the past, and in the classes you've taken, you have had that feeling like you've got the gift. And I really think that's exactly what it is. It's a gift to be able to interpret, to take concepts and language and vocabulary and communicate them in such a way as to be meaningful and effective for the individual who's receiving them. It's a great blessing to be able to do that. So it's a gift. You may be looking at, for example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a government division, releases information about careers, occupations, and their growth over the next few years. Interpreters and translators is supposed to be really a hot area for the next 10 years. So you may have looked at that. You may have looked at income, for example. The average interpreter, ASL interpreter, makes somewhere between $40,000 and $70,000. Now there's higher depending upon specialty, but let's call it somewhere in that range depending upon the area you get into. Tell you what, by the way, I'll leave a link because we did another video on how much you could expect to make as an interpreter. So I'll link that link, leave that link for you so you can check it out. Let's talk about the kind of types of interpreters. You've got K-12. Education is a huge employer of interpreters. Elementary, junior high, middle school, high school. All right, so the K-12 area, that's a big one. You've got interpreters in the Fortune 100 companies. Now this one's kind of a fascinating one. Sometimes as an interpreter, you may be assigned to one individual and you'll be with them all day long. In other situations, you may go from event to event to event. So it may be a company event. It may be a one-on-one training. It may be a manager meeting with an employee. It may be a group setting, an HR situation. You may be interviewing for an applicant who's looking to work at that location. So you can see in that interpreting environment, you've got your whole breadth of different challenges and opportunities. You may look to specialize in the medical or legal field, okay? I'll tell you one that's really exploded in demand, and that's video relay. If you know or can think of a call center, you're in a cubicle and phone calls are made in and out, and so you go from client to client to client to client, never leaving. So you don't have that wasted time of traveling. You're in that situation, signing, interpreting for a whole variety of people. That's a video relay service. We'll probably talk more about that a little bit later. You may be freelance. Freelance is one where you get called upon by different companies, government obligations, whatever, looking for interpreters, or you work for an agency who contracts with those facilities and then contracts with you as an independent contractor, freelance, to come and interpret. And those occupations, those jobs, super flexible, right? You pick when you want to interpret, what the situation is, and go from there. Now, you also have some downtime. So you don't have the steady, dependable income coming in that you might have in some of those other situations. All right, so that's an intro into becoming an interpreter. Now, this video, we're going to break it down. We're going to have if you're a high school student, if you're a college or university student, and then post-university. So let's begin with high school. All right, in high school, the very first thing you ought to do, does your local state recognize American Sign Language as a distinct language in itself? And the reason I say that is because next, if your state does, your local school should. Does your high school offer American Sign Language? And if it does it count it as an elective credit, or does it count it as foreign language credit? Really critical for you to figure that out, because the next step as a high school student, you ought to be looking down the road and trying to figure out what college or university do I want to attend? And does that college or university, if they require foreign language as criteria for entrance, do they recognize ASL, American Sign Language, as fulfilling that foreign language requirement? Pretty big deal. So you ought to check it out. You're going to want to explore an associate's degree versus a bachelor's degree versus a master's degree. And we're going to talk more about that as we talk about the college situation. Now, back to high school. Is there a ASL club at your high school? If not, start one, right? One of the best ways to get good at ASL is practice, practice, practice. You'll be practicing with other students who are learning American Sign Language as well. And if you've got that club or you have that class, see if you can't invite interpreters from the community into your class, right? Ask them all the kind of questions. What's their day like? What's the most challenging situation they've had? Why did they do it in the first place? Get that kind of interaction going, right? And if you're still here, you're still progressing, see if you can't do a job shadow, right? Work with your high school, work with your counselor. Can you get credit, or does your high school require a career, technology, education requirement? It's different in every state. That you could go out with an interpreter on site, on location, to see what that job is like, to get that experience. Now, if you're still in it, what about volunteering? Is there an opportunity for you to volunteer helping out in a situation with deaf kids, for example, in a K-12 situation, all right? So that's the beginning part with high school. Now, let's move on to college, because in college is where you've got requirements for a bachelor's degree and going on from there, all right? We'll do that next. Okay, so let's talk to the college and university student. Again, similar to the high school, what offerings do you have at your college or university in ASL? Do you have a full-blown program where they teach both sign and culture, all kinds of very rich and rewarding program? You may have a college that has just a few ASL classes. You've got to see what does your college offer and where do you go from here, right? What are the undergrad requirements for the state you want to live in? Let me explain that. Every state has different regs. Some states will require a bachelor's degree in order for you to get the highest level of certification. So here's a suggestion for you. Remember we talked earlier about the highest paid interpreters are the ones that have a specialization, right? Let's say you have a background in legal. You were a paralegal, you've got a background in law, you've taken some poli-sci classes, you understand court procedure, whatever that might be. You're head and shoulders above other interpreters who don't have that background. So if you have a bachelor's degree, experience in that field, when agencies or government or employers are looking for interpreters, you can bring that specialty along with you, command a higher price, and be, quite frankly, be a better interpreter, right? Let me give you another one, right? For example, let's say you've got a computer science background, right? Now imagine what that brings to the table if you go interview at a Google or a Microsoft. But again, imagine what that does to making you a more efficient, a more effective, a clearer interpreter as you're taking the language concepts that you actually understand and interpreting them, right? So that's the real key when it comes to career path is, I think, getting that bachelor's degree in a area that you enjoy, right? Call it physics, chem, law, business, comp-sci, whatever it might be. And then looking at interpreting as another path to put that to use. Now, back to your state requirements. Again, this is where the state you're going to interpret in. Associates, bachelors, masters. Okay, almost everybody's requiring a bachelor's. Not necessarily a bachelor's of deaf ed or interpreting. Many states, it's a bachelor's of any degree, okay, any focus or concentration. Let's talk about ITP programs. You're going to see that term. interpreter training program. There are some colleges, some states that offer super accelerated and focused programs in getting you to challenge the national certification test, right? It's a term you got to look out for, ITP, Interpreter Training Program. Now, what else should you do? You got to get out in the community, okay? Is there a deaf center in your area? If so, get over there. Ask them, what should I do? What do you think? What's your opinion? If you can interview some deaf, give me an example of a great interpreting experience you had and what about it made it great. Get some real world understanding, some of the pain, some of the joys that come along with interpreting, and you do that by being out in the community. Now, the hands need to learn to work. There's no two ways about that. Your goal is to get to the point where it comes in the ears and the wonderful process that goes on in your mind just goes like that and it comes off the hands. And you're doing it, and that just takes practice, and being out in the community, associating with the deaf, understanding the deaf, challenging, talking to, and really just jumping in heads first, okay? I would interview some interpreters, as we talked about previously. Find some interpreters. What's their challenge? What job do they have? Are they doing relay? Are they doing government? Are they doing legal? Are they specializing? Are they a generalist? What do they like and what do they hate? So important to get that real world experience so that you don't go through all this and get to the end and realize, oh, you know what? I don't know why I did this in the first place. So let's go back to the why. Why are you doing this? Understand it clearly, set those goals, and get out and do something about it. Those would be the really next steps. Now, we're going to move on and talk about post-university and the real critical thing, which is national certification, which crosses state boundaries. So let's talk about that next. Okay, so you're either out of school, right? You're a post-university individual. Perhaps it's time for a career change. Or you're done with your university training, and now you're trying to figure out the next step, all right? Here's the first place I would send you to, and I'm going to include all these links in the description below. The first place you're going to go to is what's called discoverinterpreting.org. This is a multiple partner site that will offer a lot of FAQs, answers, resources as you're exploring ASL interpreting as a career path. So discoverinterpreting.org. All right. Next one I'm going to let you know about is RID, Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. And again, I'll include all these links, so don't worry about trying to write all this down. All right. Next, we have the National Interpreting Certification Test. That's the NIC. NIC. That's one example of an exam. Last one we'll give you. CASLI. It's the Center for Assessment of Sign Language Interpretation. I had to look down at my notes to get that one right. I'll give you links to all those kind of things. But here's what you're really looking for is depending upon what education level you've got. Do you have an associate's? Do you have a bachelor's? Did you go through an interpreter training program? What's next step? Very first step for you is, where do I plan on interpreting? What are those state requirements? There are some states that don't require any kind of national certification, right? You can jump right in. There are other states that are quite stringent, requiring a bachelor's, ITP program, and national certification, depending upon what kind of interpreting you want to do. So please, 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 I'll put some links here. Do some homework. Do a little bit of research. Check the FAQs on your state to see what the requirements are, because that'll really give you some direction. Now, let's wrap this up. Is it a wonderfully fulfilling career path? Absolutely, no question. Are there different routes you can take? Absolutely. We talked about K-12, private industry, the Fortune 100, bigger companies, quite frankly, government, freelance, and video relay, which quite frankly has exploded in demand over 20 years. Video relay, if you can imagine this, is taking a device, a display device, into a situation where there's a deaf individual, where perhaps there wasn't another interpreter around who could come take care of that assignment. That device displays an interpreter who is sitting in a cubicle, who is hearing and interpreting for that individual. That's become a very competitive space. So that's one. And then last, but like I mentioned before, is freelance. You pick the assignment, the day, the time that you want to go work. Super big on freedom. It may fulfill what you're looking for when it comes to personal satisfaction and a career path. However, the revenue, the money that you're going to make is not as dependable because you're taking on freelance assignments. So just be aware of that. Anyway, that was a really long video. All right, for that subscriber who asked, I hope that was helpful. If not, send me another note and say, hey man, you blew it. Let's do it again. I'll be happy to. I've got a big love for interpreters, obviously. Interpreters make a difference as they communicate information, concepts, educational opportunities to the deaf if they're well trained and if they're good and if they practice, not to mention continuing education, and we won't go down that route now, but as a professional interpreter, you'll be expected to keep up on your skills so that you're providing the very best quality when it comes to interpreting services. All right? Appreciate you joining. Please subscribe. Send me a request if there's a video that you want to see. Thanks.